My name is Danielle Murphy, and this is my digital storytelling project on my experience with breastfeeding explained by non-western ways of knowing. In 2012, I entered a new stage of my life, one characterized by copious amounts of new information, experience, and emotions. I became a mother. One of the biggest learning curves was my experience with breastfeeding. It was this experience, along with other parts of motherhood, that made me cognizant of the ways intuition guide learning, as well as how the structures in our society don't provide equally for women, especially less privileged women, for navigating this journey. I am the type of person that is inclined to find evidence-based research when trying to learn about something I don't know about. Many first-time moms can relate to the experience of information overload in the form of literature, expert advice, doctors' recommendations, anecdotal advice, as well as portrayals of motherhood in the media. I was no different. I read everything I could about birth, breastfeeding, and all areas of baby I could find. Particularly when it came to breastfeeding, I soaked everything up. Talking to friends who had went through it, as well as lactation consultants, I began to overthink it. But nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. Only the experience of learning how not only to breastfeed, but how much of the whole act of adding another human being into your world that depends solely on you can change your life. I quickly figured out that it was also my experience and the experience of others that would provide me with the path to success. Knoll's 1980 concept of how experience as a resource of learning describes what it was like to learn by not only what worked for me, but what the experience of others added to my success in learning how to successfully breastfeed. Learning to breastfeed and my subsequent status of becoming an advocate for breastfeeding resulted in transformative learning. I feel strongly that women should be supported and heard to reach their own breastfeeding goals because I was able to experience that support. This experience has been an example of embodied learning that has made me realize the importance of knowledge acquisition other than traditional Western ways of knowing. Freeler 2008 describes embodied learning as being attentive to the body and its experiences as a way of knowing. This type of learning involves tacit or intuitive knowledge that is described as knowing what we experience rather than thinking about it. Emotions are an integral part of embodied knowing as they are experienced through the body and are part of how we know and learn. Both tacit knowledge and emotions were an integral part of my embodied learning experience with breastfeeding, as I couldn't always say why I felt a certain way or provide a concrete example or resource that described what I was going through. It was the knowledge I experienced from my body, emotions, as well as the information available from experts, as well as other embodied learners that contributed to my success. Breastfeeding has made me more aware of how critical theory and a constructivist perspective is important in an understanding that the rates of breastfeeding and how cultural factors can negatively impact these. Some of the booby traps that I experienced were able to be overcome because of the privilege I possess being a white, cisgendered, middle-class female. Taking a constructivist perspective and accounting for the different experiences of minority and low socioeconomic status individuals has been important to me when approaching opportunities to increase advocacy. Critical theory is a great way to look at the reasons there are disparities in breastfeeding rates between differing groups in the United States. A 2014 article by Ronnie Mala, published in the Wall Street Journal, provides 5 of the barriers in American society that negatively impact breastfeeding. My experience was privileged in that I was able to overcome these barriers and have surpassed the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations for breastfeeding, and embodied learning has enabled me to meet my own goals. But that is not the case for many marginalized individuals, and critical theory is a great way to examine how these factors, as well as other barriers such as lack of support and knowledge in the form of International Board of Lactation Consultants and physician practice and misinformation. My experience with breastfeeding and my subsequent desire to advocate for increased normalization and rates of breastfeeding for all women who choose to do so has been an eye-opening realization of the prevalence of hegemony. Although America has improved in many areas of equality for women, they still are far behind in accommodating working parents, especially breastfeeding mothers. Lack of maternity leave, poor work life balance, and economic difficulties have all been reasons I have heard from mothers as challenges they have faced in reaching their breastfeeding goals. One of the personal experiences I've had in regards to hegemony is how breasts are viewed first and foremost as sexual objects in the U.S., and it has become one of my personal goals to normalize the act of breastfeeding to change the dialogue about public breastfeeding. While breastfeeding is a non-formal learning experience, during this module I kept comparing my experiences and those of others to the non-Western ways of learning proposed. While this topic is a personal one, I intend to apply what I have learned here in approaching professional learning opportunities for both myself and for the resident physicians I work with, through creating culturally competent learning encounters and opening up the dialogue to utilizing embodied learning along with traditional Western ways of learning. I hope the description of my experience in non-Western ways of knowing learning styles has been helpful. Please see my references in regards to the images I've included.